A dream honeymoon in paradise. A luxury resort on a private Fijian island, crystal blue waters and white sand beaches stretching as far as the eye could see. For most newlyweds, this would be the beginning of their happily ever after. Christy Chen believed he was her forever, the man she'd build a life with, raise a family with, grow old beside, until the very end. But she was wrong. So terribly wrong. A successful pharmacist who had worked tirelessly to help underserved communities, she had finally found love with Bradley Dawson. After a whirlwind 3-month romance, they were married and jetted off to one of the world's most exclusive resorts. But what seemed like the perfect honeymoon would soon end with a body in a bathroom, a husband on the run, and questions no one could answer. On July 9, 2022, at 3 p.m. Fiji time, housekeeper Thomas Maui made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. At Turtle Island Resort, one of the world's most exclusive vacation destinations, he peered through the bathroom louvres of Bureau 15 after the honeymooning couple inside had missed breakfast and lunch. What he saw can only be described as horrific. Slumped between the toilet and wall, covered in blood, was the body of 36-year-old Christy Chen. The toilet cistern lid lay cracked and broken nearby. Blood spattered the bathroom walls. The woman who had arrived at this paradise just 2 days earlier was dead. Her husband, 38-year-old Bradley Robert Dawson, was nowhere to be found. He had vanished into the night, taking his passport, over $1,000 in cash, and Christy's credit cards. Left behind was only carnage and the shattered dreams of what should have been the happiest time of their lives. But this was no random act of violence. No intruder had broken into their luxury villa. The truth was far more sinister. This was a marriage built on lies, manipulation, and control that ended in the most brutal betrayal imaginable. Christy Chen was a woman who had built her life around helping others. Born on September 15, 1985, she had always been driven to make a difference in the world. Her journey began in an unexpected place, the kitchen. She was a talented pastry chef who owned Sweet as Pie Bakery in Denver's Bonnie Brae neighborhood, where she created beautiful desserts that brought joy to her customers. But Christ wanted to do more. She returned to school, determined to pursue a career that could truly impact people's lives. She enrolled at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center to become a pharmacist, throwing herself into her studies with the same passion she had brought to baking. Her dedication paid off. In 2021, she won the prestigious Wolters Kluwer Clinical Drug Information Award of Excellence in Clinical Communication for her research on social determinants of health in low-income areas. She wasn't content just to fill prescriptions. She wanted to understand why certain communities struggled to access healthcare and what could be done to help them. After graduation, Christ worked as a pharmacist at Kroger in Memphis. Her colleagues remember her as warm and kind, someone who genuinely cared about her patients and went above and beyond to help them understand their medications. She fostered dogs in her spare time and trained for marathons to raise money for St. Jude Children's Hospital. At 36, Christ was successful, accomplished, and ready for love. She had never been married and had always dreamed of finding her perfect match. Bradley Robert Dawson seemed like that dream come true. When they met in November 2021 through Memphis social circles, Dawson presented himself as everything Christy had been looking for. He was an IT specialist with apparent financial stability, charming and attentive. He showered her with attention and swept her off her feet. But the truth was far from the fairy tale it appeared to be. Dawson was still technically married when they met, having only filed for divorce from his first wife in September 2021. He was a man with secrets, someone who had already shown a pattern of manipulation and control with previous partners. His ex-girlfriend from college, Kristen Baker, would later reveal disturbing details about his character. He always had an obsession with Fiji. He wanted to go to Fiji, but more concerning were her observations about his behavior. When he drinks, he becomes someone else. He would black out and do stuff that he didn't know he did the next day. He's very manipulative and always wanted to have a lot of money, to travel and live extravagantly. These were red flags that Chris never got to see. Dawson was a master manipulator who knew exactly how to present himself to win her trust. The pace of their relationship should have been alarming to anyone watching from the outside. Dawson's divorce was finalized on January 11, 2022. Just 37 days later, on February 18, 2022, he married Christy at Memphis's historic James Lee House. 3 months, that's all it took from meeting to marriage. Christy's friends were shocked by the speed of the relationship. Christ always wanted to be married, but I just wish I would have asked more questions about who this guy was, her friend Ryan Weiss would later tell People magazine. Another friend, Morris Apere, described the quick engagement as a shock and said, "It happened so quickly." Some family members met Dawson for the first time at the wedding ceremony itself. The warning signs were there, but love had blinded Christy to the danger that was already surrounding her. 5 months after their February wedding, the newlyweds embarked on their dream honeymoon. Turtle Island Resort was the epitome of luxury, a 500-acre private island in Fiji's Yasawa archipelago that accommodated only 14 couples at a time. Villas started at $3,500 per night, and the exclusive resort had served as the filming location for the 1980 movie The Blue Lagoon. It was everything Christ had dreamed of for her honeymoon. Crystal clear waters, pristine beaches, and complete privacy in one of the world's most beautiful locations. The couple arrived at the resort on July 7, 2022, checking into Buer 15, a waterfront villa just steps from the beach. For the first day, everything seemed perfect. They participated in resort activities, enjoyed the beautiful surroundings, and appeared to be the picture of newlywed bliss. What Christy didn't know was that Dawson had been to this exact resort before, approximately 2 years earlier, with his ex-wife on their honeymoon. The revelation of this betrayal would trigger the argument that would cost Krista her life. July 8, 2022, began like any other day in paradise. The couple enjoyed the resort's amenities and participated in the evening's entertainment at the floating bar beach party. But as the night wore on, the facade began to crack. The evening started pleasantly enough. The couple attended the resort's signature floating bar beach party, where guests gathered on platforms over the crystal-clear lagoon, drinks in hand, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The atmosphere was romantic, magical even. Other honeymooners mingled, sharing stories of their new marriages and dreams for the future. But something was wrong with the Dawsons. Krista discovered the devastating truth about Dawson's previous visit to the resort, the very place she thought was their special honeymoon destination. He had already been here, with his ex-wife, on their honeymoon. The romantic gesture she believed was chosen specially for her was nothing more than a recycled memory, a lazy repeat of his previous marriage. The betrayal cut deep. Hotel workers would later testify that Christy seemed visibly upset during the evening activities. Her demeanor had changed dramatically from the happy bride who had arrived just the day before. Other guests noticed the palpable tension between the newlyweds. The loving touches and whispered sweet nothings had been replaced by cold distance and heated words. Witnesses overheard them arguing at dinner in the resort's exclusive restaurant. What should have been a romantic meal overlooking pristine beaches became a battlefield. The other diners couldn't help but notice the young bride's distress, the way she held herself, the tears she tried to hide. The romantic atmosphere that had enveloped them just hours earlier was giving way to something much darker, more sinister. As the evening progressed, their argument escalated. Krista felt humiliated, betrayed, and trapped on this remote island with a man she was beginning to realize she barely knew. The fairy tale was crumbling before her eyes, and she was thousands of miles from anyone who could help her. Security guards observed the couple leaving the party together around midnight, heading toward their waterfront villa. To outside observers, they looked like any other couple retiring for the evening, but the tension between them was electric, dangerous. What happened next would be reconstructed through witness testimony and forensic evidence, painting a picture of unspeakable violence that would shatter the tranquility of this paradise forever. The villa that had seemed like a romantic retreat just hours earlier was about to become a chamber of horrors. At 12:40 a.m. on July 9th, Mark Andrew Bresky, an Australian businessman staying in the adjacent cottage, heard something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Banging and screaming came from the Dawsons' villa, followed by complete silence. The sounds were violent, desperate. Someone was fighting for their life. Other guests in nearby Buers were jolted awake by the commotion. They reported loud banging sounds from Buer 15, as if someone was drunk and unable to control themselves inside. The banging was rhythmic, persistent, terrifying. Then came a loud scream, a sound of pure terror and pain that would echo in the memories of those who heard it forever. And then, complete silence. The silence was more terrifying than the screaming had been. It was the silence of death, of a life being extinguished in paradise. The other guests lay awake in their beds, hearts pounding, wondering what they had just witnessed. but none of them could have imagined the horror that had just unfolded mere meters away from their luxury accommodations. In Bureau 15, Krista Chen was fighting for her life. The argument that had started over his betrayal about the resort had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. Dawson's anger had turned to violence, his hands to weapons. The bathroom that was supposed to be part of their honeymoon suite became the scene of her brutal murder. The attack was sustained and vicious. Dawson beat his new wife with his fists, smashed her head against the toilet, used the toilet cistern lid as a weapon. For 6 minutes, that must have felt like an eternity. Christie suffered unimaginable pain and terror. She fought back. Her injuries showed she had tried to defend herself, but she was no match for his rage. Around 2 a.m., as Christie lay dying in their bathroom, security guards observed Dawson alone on the beach. The man who had arrived at the resort with his new bride was now by himself, preparing to flee the scene of an unthinkable crime. While his wife's body grew cold, he was already planning his escape. The paradise that had welcomed them as newlyweds would now become the site of one of the most shocking murders in Fiji's history. Dawson's actions after the murder revealed the calculated, cold-blooded nature of his crime. While Christie's body lay broken and bloodied in their bathroom, he was already executing an escape plan that showed just how methodical and heartless he truly was. He moved through their villa like a man with a mission, stepping over his wife's corpse to gather what he needed. He took his passport, the most crucial item for international flight. He collected over $1,000 in cash, money that was supposed to fund the rest of their dream honeymoon. Most callously of all, he took Christie's credit cards, planning to use his dead wife's money to fund his escape. But Dawson was cunning. He knew about modern tracking technology and was careful to leave behind anything that could be used to trace his movements. His GPS watch, which had been tracking his fitness activities throughout their trip, was left in the villa. His smartphone, with its location services and digital footprint, was abandoned. These weren't the actions of a man in panic. This was calculated, premeditated flight. As the other resort guests slept, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded, Dawson made his way to the beach. Turtle Island Resort's isolation, which made it such an exclusive and private destination, now worked in his favor. There were no police stations nearby, no immediate help for miles. The resort kept several kayaks on the beach for guest use during the day. Under the cover of darkness, Dawson dragged one of these kayaks into the water. The very waters that had seemed so beautiful and welcoming when they arrived now offered him a path to freedom. The kayak journey to neighboring Matakawalevu Island was treacherous in the darkness. The Pacific Ocean, even in this relatively sheltered area, could be dangerous for an inexperienced kayaker. But desperation drove him forward. Every stroke of the paddle took him further from the scene of his crime, and closer to what he hoped would be freedom. For 36 hours, he was a fugitive. 36 hours during which Krista's body lay undiscovered. 36 hours during which he thought he had gotten away with murder. The isolation that made Turtle Island Resort so exclusive was now working against the investigation. There was no immediate way to alert authorities, no quick response team that could be deployed. During those hours of freedom, Dawson likely believed he had committed the perfect crime. He was thousands of miles from home, in a jurisdiction where he thought he could disappear. The man who had promised to love and cherish Christie until death do them part had made that vow come true in the most horrific way possible, and thought he could simply sail away from the consequences. But paradise has a way of revealing its secrets, and his arrogance would prove to be his downfall. The morning of July 9th dawned bright and beautiful at Turtle Island Resort, just as it had every day before, and the other guests began their day in paradise, completely unaware of the horror that lay just yards away from their luxury accommodations. When the couple missed breakfast, resort staff initially thought nothing of it. Honeymooners often slept late, exhausted from their travels and eager to spend private time together. The "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging on the door of Bureau 15 seemed to confirm this assumption. Room service trays were left outside other villas as guests took their meals in the privacy of their rooms. But as the morning stretched into afternoon and the Dawsons still hadn't appeared, concern began to grow. This was an all-inclusive resort where guests typically participated in scheduled activities. The absence of the newlyweds became increasingly noticeable. When lunchtime came and went with no sign of the couple, the resort manager faced a dilemma. The "Do Not Disturb" sign was still in place, and disturbing honeymooners was the last thing the exclusive resort wanted to do. Guest privacy was paramount at Turtle Island, but something felt wrong. The manager consulted with other staff members. Had anyone seen the Dawsons? Security guards mentioned observing them leaving the beach party the night before, but no one had seen them since. The couple had missed the morning's snorkeling expedition, the afternoon's nature walk, and now lunch. For a resort that prided itself on guest engagement and personalized service, this level of absence was unprecedented. Finally, around 3 p.m., the decision was made. Resort manager instructed housekeeper Thomas Maui to check on the couple, despite the "Do Not Disturb" sign. It was a decision born of genuine concern for guest welfare, but one that would expose him to a trauma he never could have imagined. Maui approached Bureau 15 with some trepidation. Disturbing guests was always awkward, especially honeymooners who might be in intimate moments. He knocked gently on the front door, calling out in his accented English, "Housekeeping, is everything okay?" Silence. He knocked again, louder this time. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, this is housekeeping checking on you." Still nothing. Growing more concerned, Maui walked around the villa, looking for any signs of the guests. The waterfront bureaus were designed with louvered windows that could be opened for cross-ventilation, and these louvres sometimes allowed glimpses inside when the curtains weren't fully drawn. At the bathroom window, something caught his eye. Peering through the louvre, Maui saw something that would traumatize him for the rest of his life. There, slumped between the toilet and wall, was the broken body of Krista Chen. Blood covered the bathroom floor and walls. The toilet cistern lid lay cracked and shattered nearby, clearly having been used as a weapon. The woman who had arrived at this paradise just 2 days earlier as a radiant bride was dead, her body bearing the brutal evidence of an unthinkable attack. Maui stumbled backward from the window, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. This was supposed to be a place of luxury and romance, where the world's wealthiest couples came to celebrate their love. Murder was unthinkable in this setting, but the evidence before his eyes was undeniable. His hands shaking, Maui rushed to find the resort manager. Within minutes, the Fiji police were contacted, though getting them to the remote island would take precious time. The crime scene was secured as much as possible, with staff members posted to ensure no one else could witness the horror in Bureau 15. But where was Bradley Dawson? His absence from the scene immediately raised alarm bells. Had he been kidnapped? Was he injured somewhere on the island? Or was there a more sinister explanation for his disappearance? The search began immediately. The island wasn't large, and there were limited places where someone could hide. Staff members combed every inch of Turtle Island, calling out Dawson's name, checking every possible location where he might have taken shelter. They found nothing. It was then that someone noticed the missing kayak from the beach. The realization hit like a thunderbolt. Dawson hadn't been kidnapped or injured. He had fled, and that meant only one thing. He was responsible for the murder in Bureau 15. The Royal Fiji Police immediately launched a manhunt for Bradley Dawson. With limited resources and vast ocean to search, they faced a daunting task. But Dawson's arrogance would prove to be his downfall. 36 hours after fleeing the resort, he was found on Matakawalevu Island by local resident Manoa Ratolele. Dawson appeared disturbed, bruised, and bleeding from palms and feet. He was intoxicated and kept repeating to the villagers, "We had a fight." When the villagers asked what had happened, Dawson's response was chilling in its simplicity. He asked them to call the police. On some level, he knew his flight was over. When Bradley Robert Dawson was arrested on July 10, 2022, the evidence against him was already overwhelming. He had been found with his passport and personal belongings on a remote island, miles from where his wife lay dead. He had fled in the middle of the night after neighbors heard screaming and violence from their villa. His guilt seemed obvious to everyone involved. But in the interview room at the Royal Fiji Police headquarters in Suva, something unexpected happened. Before his lawyer arrived, before he had time to construct a careful defense, Dawson began to talk. And what he said would provide investigators with a detailed confession that laid bare the horrific reality of what had happened in Bureau 15. Detective Sergeant Apasai Koroi conducted the initial interview, following proper police procedures for questioning a foreign national suspected of murder. The session was recorded, creating a permanent record of Dawson's words that would later prove crucial in court. At first, Dawson seemed almost relieved to be talking. The isolation of his failed escape, the psychological pressure of what he had done, and perhaps the realization that his freedom was over had apparently broken down his defenses. He spoke in a calm, matter-of-fact tone that was chilling in its detachment from the horror he was describing. We then went to bed, and I turned to her to hug her and cuddle when she got angry and started to say that I hurt her, and she does not know whether she wanted to be with me, Dawson told the detectives. The words painted a picture of a marriage already in crisis, just 2 days into their honeymoon. He continued with devastating detail. Our argument moved towards where the toilet was, and that was when Krista pushed me, and that was when I lost it. Krista was next to the toilet. She was hurt. There was blood and a cut on her face. The confession was remarkable for what it revealed about Dawson's mindset. Even as he admitted to killing his wife, he was already constructing a narrative that portrayed himself as the victim. According to his account, Krist had been the aggressor. She had pushed him. She had started the fight. He had merely lost it, as if the brutal murder that followed was somehow an understandable reaction to being pushed by his 36-year-old wife. Detective Coroy pressed for more details, and Dawson obliged. He described the escalation of their argument, his explosion of violence, and the aftermath when he realized what he had done. The level of detail was extraordinary and incriminating. But even more revealing was what Dawson said about his actions after the murder. He described gathering his belongings, taking Krista's credit cards, and planning his escape. These weren't the panicked actions of someone who had committed a crime of passion. This was calculated, cold-blooded planning. For several hours, Dawson continued to provide details about the murder and his subsequent flight. He seemed almost compulsive in his need to explain himself, to justify his actions, to present his version of events. The investigators listened carefully, taking detailed notes and recording every word. Then, everything changed. Dawson's court-appointed lawyer, Iqbal Khan, arrived at the police station. Khan was an experienced criminal defense attorney who immediately recognized that his client had made a catastrophic error. The first rule of criminal defense is simple: don't talk to the police without representation. But Dawson had spent hours doing exactly that. Khan immediately advised Dawson to stop talking and requested a private consultation with his client. What was said in that room between lawyer and client would remain confidential, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. When the interview resumed, Dawson was a different person. The talkative, confessional suspect had been replaced by someone who understood the gravity of his situation. When presented with the typed confession statement based on his earlier admissions, Dawson made a decision that would define the rest of his case. He refused to sign it. This refusal created a legal complication that would reverberate through the entire case. In Fiji's legal system, as in many Commonwealth jurisdictions, an unsigned confession presents challenges for prosecutors. While the recorded interview could still be used as evidence, the lack of a signed statement gave the defense room to argue about the voluntariness and accuracy of Dawson's admissions. Khan immediately began laying the groundwork for Dawson's defense. He told media, "At the moment, it is complete denial. He did not murder his wife. As it is, there's nothing implicating him." It was a bold statement given the circumstances of Dawson's arrest and the recorded confession, but it signaled that the defense would challenge every aspect of the prosecution's case. The transformation was remarkable. The man who had provided detailed admissions of guilt just hours earlier was now claiming complete innocence. The confession that had seemed like a breakthrough for the investigation became a contentious piece of evidence that would be fought over for the next 2.5 years. But the damage was done. Dawson's own words, captured on tape before he understood the full implications of what he was saying, provided prosecutors with a roadmap to his guilt. His refusal to sign the statement might create legal hurdles, but it couldn't erase the fact that he had described, in his own voice, how he had murdered his wife. Dr. Avikali Mate's autopsy revealed the horrific truth about Krista's final moments. She had died from traumatic brain injury caused by multiple blunt force trauma wounds to her head. The injuries were extensive and brutal. Severe swelling around both eyes and mouth, deep lacerations around her eyes, cuts covering her face, bruises and cuts across her right arm, a large gaping wound on her back above several smaller incisions. The injuries were so severe that Krista's body could not be embalmed for transport to the United States. She had to be cremated in Fiji, denying her parents the opportunity for a proper funeral and burial in their homeland. Despite his apparent confession, Dawson pleaded not guilty to murder charges. From his jail cell, he maintained his innocence in interviews with reporters, saying, "We never had any physical arguments in our relationship, and she was my everything." His defense team, led first by Iqbal Khan and later by Anil Prasad, argued that Kristi's death was accidental, that she had fallen while intoxicated. But the evidence against Dawson was overwhelming. The prosecution had witness testimony about the sounds of violence, forensic evidence from the crime scene, and most damaging of all, his own words describing how he had killed his wife. For over 2 years, Dawson sat in a Fijian jail, awaiting trial, held without bail as the case slowly worked its way through the legal system. In December 2024, Bradley Robert Dawson finally faced justice in Lautoka High Court. The 8-day trial featured 14 witnesses testifying for the prosecution, each piece of testimony adding to the overwhelming case against him. Dawson chose not to testify in his own defense and called no witnesses. The evidence spoke for itself. Witness testimony about the sounds of violence from their villa, forensic evidence showing the brutal nature of the attack, his flight from the scene with passport and money, his own admissions to police about losing control and hurting Christie. Justice Riaz Hamza methodically dismantled the defense's accident theory. The judge noted that the fact Dawson was found with his passport and belongings indicated premeditated flight. For the aforesaid reasons, I am of the opinion that the defense's version cannot be believed, and the same version is rejected. On December 12, 2024, Bradley Robert Dawson was found guilty of murder. Justice Hamza stated, "Having considered all the evidence in its totality, I am of the opinion that the prosecution has proved the charge of murder against the accused beyond reasonable doubt." Christie's parents, Tao Chen and Xiaowei Liu, had lost their only child in the most horrific way imaginable. At the sentencing hearing on February 11, 2025, they delivered victim impact statements that laid bare their devastation. Tao Chen told the court, "She was my only child, my little girl, and my reason for living. Each day since her death has been a struggle to find meaning in a life that now feels empty." Christie's mother delivered a searing condemnation of the man who had murdered her daughter. "No mother should have to know this is how her daughter's life ended, and by the hands of the very person who took a vow to love, honor, and cherish her. I can only hope that the rest of your life is filled with misery, loneliness, and despair. I hope the memories of what you did to her in her last moments haunt you, because you are a monster." Justice Hamza sentenced Bradley Robert Dawson to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years before parole consideration. Dawson will be eligible for parole in 2043. He will be 63 years old, but Krista Chen will never get to see her 37th birthday, will never fulfill her dreams of having children, will never get to continue her work helping underserved communities access healthcare.